The carriage jolted hard, and Elira Voss gripped the seat as the wheels struck stone. Outside the window, the towers of Thornwood Castle rose like blades against a gray sky. She was not a bride, riding toward love. She was a woman, riding toward a debt she had agreed to pay with her whole life. Duke Alaric Thornwood stood waiting at the gate, arms folded, his face carved from cold marble. He did not smile when she stepped down from the carriage. He did not offer his hand. He simply looked at her the way a merchant looks at a delivery he has already paid for. "You are late," he said. "The roads were bad, my lord," Elira answered, keeping her voice steady, even as her heart pounded. "You will learn that I do not tolerate lateness. Not from servants. Not from wives." The word wife struck her like a slap, though she had known it was coming. She had signed the papers 3 days ago in a small office in the capital, her hand trembling as she wrote her name beside his seal. Her grandmother's medicine had cost more than Elira could earn in 5 years of sewing gowns for noblewomen who barely looked at her. When the offer came through a quiet lawyer, promising gold enough to save her grandmother's life in exchange for a marriage of convenience, Elira had not hesitated for long. She told herself it was simply a trade, a signature for a life, nothing more. She did not know, standing in that gate with the wind pulling at her plain gray cloak, that the man in front of her carried his own desperate reason for this marriage, one sharpened by blood and old law. Alaric led her inside without another word, his boots echoing against the stone floor. Servants lined the hallway, their eyes following her with open curiosity. She caught whispers behind gloved hands. A seamstress. No family name. No dowry. Why would the Duke choose someone so plain? Elira kept her chin high, though inside, old instincts stirred. Instincts she had spent years burying. She noticed the guards near the doors, the placement of the windows, the distance between exits. She noticed everything, the way someone trained to survive notices things. She forced herself to look only mildly interested, like any ordinary bride touring her new home. Alaric stopped before a set of tall doors carved with the Thornwood crest, 2 wolves circling a broken crown. "This will be your chamber," he said. "You will not enter mine unless summoned. Meals are served at 7. You will attend court functions when required, and remain silent unless spoken to. Do you understand the terms?" "I signed the papers, my lord. I understand them well enough." Something flickered in his eyes, gone before she could name it. Perhaps surprise. Perhaps something else. He turned and walked away without another word, leaving her standing alone in the vast corridor, with nothing but the cold stone and her own racing thoughts. That night, alone in the chamber assigned to her, Elira sat by the window and watched the moon rise over unfamiliar hills. She thought of her grandmother, resting now in a small cottage far from here, finally receiving proper care because of the gold Elira had accepted. She thought of the years before that, the fear that had chased her since she was a child, the running, the hiding, the careful erasing of every trace of who she had once been. She had a name once, long ago, that she never spoke aloud anymore. A name buried under years of false papers and quiet towns. She touched the small mark on her wrist, hidden beneath her sleeve, a faint shape like a rising sun that she always kept covered. If anyone recognized that mark, everything she had built to survive would collapse in an instant. She pushed the thought away. That life was over. She was Elira Voss now, a seamstress who had married a cold duke for money. Nothing more. A knock came at her door near midnight. She opened it to find not Alaric, but an older woman with kind eyes and a candle in her hand. "I am Nora," the woman said. "I've served this house since before the Duke was born. I thought you might want tea. New brides rarely sleep their first night here." Elira accepted the tea gratefully, and Nora lingered, studying her with quiet warmth. "He isn't cruel because he wants to be," Nora said softly, as if reading Elira's thoughts. "He carries burdens heavier than most men could bear. But that is not my story to tell." "Then whose story is it?" Nora only smiled sadly and excused herself, leaving Elira with more questions than answers. The following morning, Elira rose early, long before the sun had fully cleared the hills. Years of hardship had taught her body to wake before danger did, even when no danger threatened. She dressed simply and walked the halls, memorizing the layout of her new home, the way she once memorized escape routes in every town she passed through. She found the household in disarray, Ledgers piled unopened in the steward's office. Servants arguing over wages that had not been properly recorded. A kitchen running short on supplies because no one had organized the deliveries in months. The estate, despite its grand towers and ancient title, was quietly falling apart from neglect. Alira said nothing to anyone that day. She only watched, learning the rhythms of the house, the way she once learned the rhythms of danger. That evening, she was summoned to dine with Alaric for the first time. The dining hall was long and cold, lit by only a few candles despite its size, as though warmth itself had been rationed. Alaric sat at the head of the table, a stack of documents beside his plate, his expression tight with some private frustration. The eastern fields failed to produce this season, he said, more to himself than to her. And my steward cannot explain why the treasury shows losses no one can account for. Alira hesitated only a moment before speaking. May I see the ledgers, my lord? Alaric looked up, clearly surprised. You are a seamstress. I am also someone who has managed accounts before, she said carefully. Numbers do not care about titles, they only care about truth. He studied her for a long moment, suspicion flickering behind his eyes, but exhaustion and desperation won over pride. Fine. If you can find something my steward missed, I will consider it a fair use of your time. The next day, Alira sat for hours in the estate office, poring over pages of tangled numbers. She found small mistakes at first, careless errors from an overworked steward. Then she found something larger, a pattern of missing funds, routed through a merchant contract that made no logical sense. She did not draw conclusions yet. She simply marked the pages and prepared to explain her findings. When she presented her notes to Alaric that evening, he read through them in silence, his jaw tightening with each line. This merchant, he said finally, is tied to my uncle's household. I did not know that, my lord. I only followed the numbers. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time, not as an obligation, but as a person with a mind sharper than he had expected. You are not what I assumed you would be, Alira Voss. Neither are you, my lord, she said quietly, though I suspect that is not entirely a compliment in your case. For the briefest moment, something like the ghost of a smile touched his lips before he caught himself and returned to his usual coldness. Do not mistake competence for closeness between us. This marriage remains what it always was. I have never mistaken it for anything else, Alira replied, though a small part of her wondered if that was still entirely true. Word spread quickly through the household of the new duchess's sharp mind. Servants who once whispered about her plain background began watching her with quiet respect instead. Nora brought her tea each evening without being asked, and slowly, carefully, Alira began to feel less like a stranger within those cold stone walls. But not everyone welcomed her presence. Late one evening, as she walked toward the kitchen for water, she overheard two guards speaking in hushed, urgent tones near the servants' entrance. The old man will not be pleased, one muttered. If the Duke's new wife starts fixing what she should not be fixing, certain arrangements become difficult. Then perhaps arrangements should be reconsidered before questions grow too loud. Alira froze in the shadows, her pulse quickening. She recognized the tone of men speaking about danger, disguised as business. She said nothing, retreating quietly the way she came, but the unease settled deep into her chest. She did not yet know who they served, or what exactly they feared her uncovering, but she understood, with the same instinct that had kept her alive through years of hiding, that something dangerous moved beneath the surface of Thornwood Castle, something that had nothing to do with harvest failures or careless stewards. That night, she sat by her window again, staring out at the same hills as before, though they no longer felt unfamiliar. She thought of her grandmother, safe and healing. She thought of the gold that had bought that safety, and she thought, with a small shiver, that perhaps this marriage of convenience was about to become far more complicated than either she or the Duke had ever intended. Somewhere in the castle, footsteps paused outside a locked study, and papers were quietly burned before anyone could read them. Somewhere else, a letter was sealed and sent toward a distant estate, carrying warnings about a duchess who noticed too much. And in her chamber, Alira pressed her fingers gently against the hidden mark on her wrist, a habit she could not break whenever fear crept close, unaware that fate had already begun weaving her forgotten past into the very future she had tried so carefully to escape. The next morning brought an invitation Alaric had not expected. His uncle, Lord Edmund Thornwood, requested a visit under the guise of congratulating the newly married couple. Alaric's expression darkened the moment he read the letter. "My uncle does not congratulate," he told Alira over breakfast. "He calculates." "Then we should prepare carefully," Alira said simply. Alaric glanced at her, surprised by the word we, though he said nothing to correct it. Perhaps, for the first time since this arrangement began, he did not want to. Lord Edmund arrived 2 days later with an entourage larger than necessary for a simple family visit. He was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He greeted Alaric with practiced warmth and turned that same false warmth toward Alira, studying her the way a hunter studies unfamiliar tracks in the snow. "So this is the seamstress who captured my nephew's attention," Edmund said smoothly. "How delightfully unconventional." "I am honored to meet you, my lord," Alira replied evenly, giving nothing away. Edmund's eyes lingered a moment too long on her wrist, though her sleeve covered the mark completely. Still, something in his gaze made her skin prickle with quiet alarm. Throughout dinner, Edmund spoke of politics, of old inheritance laws, of the importance of producing an heir quickly to secure the Thornwood line against outside claims. Each word felt less like conversation and more like careful pressure, testing for cracks. "An heir will settle many concerns," Edmund said, watching Alaric closely. "For the family, for the title, for everyone's peace of mind." "That is not a subject for the dinner table," Alaric replied coldly. "Of course," Edmund said, smiling again. "Forgive an old man's eagerness." But Alira noticed the way his eyes shifted toward her one final time before dinner ended. Calculating, measuring, as though she were a puzzle piece he could not yet place. She said nothing of it that night, but she did not sleep easily either. Days passed, and life within Thornwood Castle slowly found a strange rhythm. Alira continued correcting the estate's tangled finances, uncovering more discrepancies tied quietly back to Edmund's associates. Alaric, though still guarded, began seeking her counsel more often, their conversations shifting gradually from cold necessity to something resembling genuine partnership. One evening, as autumn winds rattled the castle windows, Alaric found her in the study long after most of the household had gone to sleep, candlelight flickering over pages of numbers she refused to abandon until solved. "You do not need to work this hard," he said quietly from the doorway. "I made an agreement," she answered without looking up. "I intend to honor it fully. Most in your position would have simply enjoyed the comfort and asked no questions. I am not most people," she said, finally meeting his gaze. Alaric studied her for a long moment, something unfamiliar shifting behind his usually guarded eyes. "No," he said quietly, "you are not." For the first time since her arrival, the distance between them felt slightly smaller, though neither was ready to admit exactly why. Outside the castle walls, however, forces far more dangerous than family politics were already beginning to move. A rider departed quietly from Edmund's estate that same night, carrying a sealed letter toward a destination neither Alaric nor Alira could yet imagine. A message that would soon place Alira's carefully hidden past directly in the path of forces far greater than one duke's ambition. For now, though, within the flickering candlelight of a quiet study, two strangers, bound by contract, sat a little closer than duty required, unaware that the true story of their marriage had only just begun to unfold. Alira moved through the castle each morning now, with a quiet sense of purpose she had not expected to find in a marriage built from necessity. The ledgers were nearly untangled, the missing funds traced back further than she had first realized, and the servants who once whispered about her plain background now greeted her with genuine respect. Yet beneath this new rhythm of life, an uneasy stillness lingered, the kind that comes before a storm no one has noticed gathering yet. Alaric noticed the change in his household too. Meals no longer felt like obligations to endure. Conversations stretched longer than necessary, lingering over small details neither of them needed to discuss. He told himself it was simply practical, that a well-run estate benefited them both. He did not yet let himself consider why he found himself seeking her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with numbers at all. One crisp morning, a messenger arrived breathless from the northern road, requesting an audience with the Duke immediately. Alaric received him in the main hall, Alira standing quietly nearby, having grown accustomed to being present for estate matters, even when not directly summoned. My lord, the messenger said, bowing quickly. A hunting party from the capital has arrived at the edge of your lands, requesting to join you for the autumn hunt, as tradition dictates. Alaric's jaw tightened. Which nobles? Lord Edmund's closest allies, my lord. They say it is simply custom, nothing more. Nothing involving my uncle is ever simply custom, Alaric muttered. Still, refusing the hunt would draw unwanted attention, so preparations began that same day. Elira watched the flurry of activity with quiet unease, the same instinct that had once warned her of danger in unfamiliar towns, now prickling at the base of her neck. The morning of the hunt arrived cold and clear, frost clinging to the grass beneath the horses' hooves. Alaric rode at the front of the party, dressed in dark hunting leathers, his expression composed but distant. Elira had not been expected to join, yet something in her refused to remain behind, a quiet worry she could not fully explain. I would like to come, she said simply, meeting Alaric's surprised gaze. This is not a task for a duchess unfamiliar with the woods. I ride well enough, my lord, and I would rather see for myself than wait anxiously within castle walls. Something in her tone must have convinced him, for he nodded once and allowed her to join, assigning a horse gentle enough for a rider unfamiliar with hunting terrain. She said nothing of the years she had spent learning to ride swiftly through forests far more dangerous than this one, back when survival depended on speed rather than sport. The hunting party moved deep into the forest, laughter and conversation echoing among the trees as nobles competed for the first successful catch of the day. Elira remained near the rear of the group, watching carefully, noticing things others seemed too distracted to see. A rider lingering too far behind, another whose horse kept drifting subtly closer to the Duke's position without any obvious reason. When the group paused near a shallow stream to rest the horses, Elira quietly studied the surrounding trees. She noticed a glint of metal hidden within the brush, gone the moment she blinked, as though someone had shifted quickly out of sight. Her pulse quickened, old instincts sharpening instantly. She moved closer to Alaric without drawing attention. My lord, she said quietly, we should return to open ground soon. He glanced at her, puzzled by the urgency in her voice. The hunt has barely begun. Please, she said, meeting his eyes with quiet intensity. Trust me on this. Something in her expression must have convinced him, for he called for the party to regroup and prepare to move toward more open terrain. But before the order could be fully carried out, sudden movement erupted from the trees. A man lunged from the brush, blade flashing toward Alaric, with clear and dangerous intent. Elira reacted before conscious thought could catch up with instinct. She threw herself forward, catching the attacker's wrist mid-strike and twisting sharply, a motion so practiced and precise that gasps rippled through the stunned hunting party. The blade clattered uselessly to the ground as she forced the man off balance, driving him down with controlled, efficient movement that left no room for further attack. Guards rushed forward immediately, subduing the attacker before he could recover. Alaric stood frozen for a long moment, staring at Elira with wide, disbelieving eyes. How, he said slowly, did you do that? Elira's chest rose and fell quickly, energy still coursing through her. She had not meant to reveal such skill so openly, but there had been no time for hesitation. A rough childhood, she said carefully. I learned to protect myself early. That was not the defense of a frightened seamstress, Alaric said, his voice low. That was training, real training. Does it matter how I learned, my lord, so long as it kept you safe? He studied her for a long moment, suspicion and something softer warring behind his eyes. It matters more than you realize, he said quietly, though he did not press further, not yet, not with guards nearby and an attacker requiring immediate questioning. The captured man was brought back to the castle under heavy guard, refusing to speak despite firm questioning. Alaric paced his study late into the night, unable to shake the memory of Elira's precise, controlled movements far beyond anything a common upbringing could explain. Elira, meanwhile, sat alone in her chamber, hands trembling slightly now that the danger had passed. She had promised herself years ago never to reveal that part of her past again, yet instinct had overridden every careful precaution the moment Alaric's life stood threatened. She pressed her fingers against the hidden mark on her wrist, breathing slowly to calm the storm of memories threatening to surface. The following morning, Alaric summoned her to his study, his expression unreadable. The attacker still refuses to name who sent him, he said. But I intend to find out. And I intend to understand exactly who my wife truly is. I have told you what I can, Elira said carefully. No, Alaric said, stepping closer, his voice quieter now, almost gentle, despite the firmness beneath it. You have told me what you believe is safe to tell. That is not the same as truth. Elira said nothing, torn between the instinct to protect her secrets and something new stirring within her, a quiet desire to finally trust someone after years of solitary survival. I am not asking to expose you, Alaric continued, surprising her further. I am asking because yesterday, you saved my life without hesitation, and I find myself wanting to understand the woman capable of such courage. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Neither was ready to fully answer. Elira finally spoke, her voice softer than before. There are things in my past that remain dangerous, my lord, not just for me, for anyone connected to me. Then let me help carry that danger, Alaric said quietly, rather than leaving you to face it alone. Elira looked up at him, searching his expression for the cold calculation she had grown accustomed to since her arrival. She found none, only quiet sincerity, unfamiliar and unsettling in its warmth. Perhaps, she said carefully, in time. It was not the full truth he sought, but it was more honesty than either of them had offered the other since the day the carriage first arrived at Thornwood's gates. And for now, beneath the weight of unanswered questions and a growing, unspoken bond, that fragile beginning of trust would have to be enough. Elsewhere, far from the castle walls, a sealed letter finally reached its destination, delivered into the hands of a scholar known throughout the region for his knowledge of forgotten kingdoms and lost bloodlines. He read the description within carefully, his eyes narrowing at a single detail mentioned almost in passing, a faint mark shaped like a rising sun. He set the letter down slowly, memories of a kingdom destroyed decades ago stirring uneasily within him. Within days, he began preparations for a journey toward Thornwood Castle, carrying questions that would soon place Elira's carefully guarded past directly into the center of a storm far larger than either she or Alaric could yet imagine. The stranger arrived at Thornwood Castle just before sunset, his cloak dusty from days of travel, his eyes sharp despite his weary posture. He introduced himself to the gate guards as Godfrey Lane, a scholar of old kingdoms, seeking an audience with the Duke regarding a matter of historical importance. The guards, unimpressed by scholars, nearly turned him away, until he mentioned a name that made even seasoned soldiers pause, the lost kingdom of Varenthia. Alaric agreed to receive him out of simple curiosity, expecting nothing more than another academic, seeking patronage for research no one truly cared about. He did not expect the scholar's gaze to fall so quickly upon Elira, who stood quietly near the study entrance, nor did he expect the flicker of shock that crossed Godfrey's face the moment their eyes met. Forgive me, Godfrey said carefully, bowing to Alaric first, though his attention remained fixed on Elira. I did not expect to find such familiar features so far from where I once studied them. Elira's chest tightened, old fear rising instantly beneath her calm exterior. I am afraid you must be mistaken, sir, she said smoothly. I have never traveled far from these regions. Perhaps, Godfrey said, though his tone suggested he did not believe her. Still, there is a story I have spent many years researching, of a kingdom destroyed swiftly and completely, its royal bloodline said to have ended that same terrible night. Yet whispers persisted for years afterward, whispers of a child who escaped, carrying a mark passed only through generations of that royal house. Alaric's gaze shifted between the scholar and his wife, suspicion sharpening within him. What mark? He asked slowly. Godfrey hesitated, glancing toward Elira, as though seeking permission she clearly had no intention of granting. A shape resembling a rising sun, he said finally, hidden traditionally upon the wrist. The silence that followed felt heavier than stone. Alaric's eyes moved instinctively toward Elira's sleeve, though she kept her arms carefully folded, giving nothing away outwardly despite the storm building rapidly within her. This conversation grows tiresome, Elira said, forcing calm into her voice. I have work to attend to within the estate, my lord, if you will excuse me. She left the study quickly, her pulse pounding as she walked briskly down the corridor. Years of careful discipline the only thing keeping her steps steady rather than frantic. Behind her, she heard Alaric dismiss the scholar politely, promising further conversation another time, though his tone carried an edge she recognized instantly. Suspicion had taken firm root, and there would be no easy escaping it now. That evening, Alaric found her in the small garden behind the eastern wing, where she often walked when her thoughts grew too heavy to remain indoors. He approached slowly, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I would like to see your wrist," he said quietly, without preamble. Alira's heart clenched painfully. "Alaric, I have given you patience," he continued, his voice steady but firm. "I have allowed secrets to remain secrets, telling myself it was simply your right, as my wife, to keep certain matters private. But a stranger arrives, speaking of destroyed kingdoms and hidden marks, and you flee the room the moment the subject arises. Tell me honestly, is there truth behind his words?" Alira closed her eyes briefly, gathering the fragile remains of her composure. "If I show you," she said quietly, "you cannot unknow what you will learn, and knowing may place you in danger far greater than anything you currently understand." "I already stood before a blade meant to end my life," Alaric said. "I am no stranger to danger." Slowly, with trembling hands, Alira pushed back her sleeve, revealing the faint mark shaped like a rising sun etched into her skin. Alaric stared at it for a long moment, memories of old history lessons stirring uneasily within him, fragments of stories about a kingdom erased overnight, its royal family destroyed in a single terrible uprising. "That kingdom fell 20 years ago," he said slowly. "Its entire royal line was said to have perished that night." "Not entirely," Alira whispered, her voice trembling now despite her best efforts. "I was very young. My nurse carried me from the palace, through tunnels meant for emergencies no one believed would ever be necessary. We fled for years afterward, changing names, changing towns, always staying one step ahead of those who wished to ensure no survivor remained to challenge what had been taken." Alaric said nothing for a long moment, processing the weight of what he had just learned. "Your real name," he said finally, quietly, "is not Alira Voss. It once was. Elowin," she said softly, the name feeling strange and heavy on her tongue after so many years of silence. "Elowin Varenthian, daughter of a house destroyed before I was old enough to remember it clearly." The garden fell into heavy silence, broken only by the distant sound of wind moving through autumn leaves. Alaric studied her carefully, searching for the fear he expected to feel, the political calculation that should have followed such a revelation. Instead, he found himself feeling something entirely different, a strange and unfamiliar protectiveness toward the woman standing before him, trembling not from cold, but from years of carefully guarded fear finally spoken aloud. "Does anyone else know?" he asked quietly. "Only my nurse, who passed many years ago. And now, apparently, a scholar who arrived far too curious for comfort. And my uncle," Alaric said slowly, pieces beginning to align uncomfortably within his mind. "The attacker in the forest. The missing funds tied to merchants connected to his household. Could he somehow know?" Alira's breath caught. She had not considered the connection until now, but the pattern suddenly seemed far too clear to ignore. "If Edmund suspects who I truly am," she said carefully, "then the danger extends far beyond simple political ambition." "Then we face this together," Alaric said firmly, surprising her with the certainty in his voice. "You do not owe me protection," Alira said quietly. "This marriage was never meant to carry such weight." "Perhaps not," Alaric admitted, stepping closer, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "But somewhere between ledgers and hunting parties and quiet evenings in the study, this arrangement became something I no longer wished to view simply as duty." Alira looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of deception, finding only quiet sincerity instead. For the first time since arriving at Thornwood Castle, she allowed herself to believe, if only briefly, that perhaps she was no longer entirely alone in carrying the weight of her hidden past. "We must find out what the scholar truly knows," Alaric said finally, his tone shifting back toward careful strategy. "And we must discover exactly how deeply my uncle's ambitions are tied to your survival." Alira nodded slowly, steadying herself against the quiet fear still coursing beneath her calm exterior. "Then let us begin tonight," she said, "before anyone else has the chance to act first." Together, They returned to the castle, the weight of old secrets now shared between them, unaware that far beyond Thornwood's walls, Lord Edmund had already begun setting careful plans into motion. Plans built upon a discovery he had long suspected, but only recently confirmed. The lost princess of Varenthia was not only alive, she was standing directly within his own family's reach, and he intended to use that knowledge exactly as he saw fit. Lord Edmund Thornwood sat alone in his private study, turning a small folded letter over in his fingers, a satisfied smile curling at the edge of his mouth. The letter confirmed what he had long suspected but never dared act upon without certainty. His nephew's quiet, unremarkable bride was, in truth, the last surviving heir of a kingdom his own allies had helped dismantle 2 decades ago. The knowledge sat in his hands like a weapon far sharper than any blade. He called for his most trusted advisor immediately. "We must move carefully," Edmund said, his voice calm, despite the storm of ambition building behind his eyes. "If the girl truly is who I believe her to be, then her existence threatens far more than my nephew's inheritance. It threatens the very foundation certain powerful men built their positions upon." "And if she reveals herself publicly?" the advisor asked cautiously. "Then old alliances crumble, old debts resurface, and men who profited from Varenthia's destruction find themselves exposed to consequences they have spent 20 years avoiding," Edmund said. "She must be silenced before that happens, quietly, before anyone else realizes what I already know." Meanwhile, within Thornwood Castle, Alaric and Alira worked late into the night. Poring over old maps and scattered historical records, Alaric had quietly gathered from the estate's private library. Godfrey Lane, the scholar, had reluctantly agreed to remain as a guest under careful watch, his knowledge proving valuable despite the danger his discovery represented. "The coup happened swiftly," Godfrey explained, spreading aged parchment across the table. "Within a single night, the entire royal family was believed eliminated, yet rumors persisted for years afterward of a child smuggled out through tunnels beneath the palace, protected by a loyal nurse who vanished completely from historical record. That nurse raised me," Alira said quietly. "She never spoke of the details, only that we were never safe staying anywhere for long." "She protected you well," Godfrey said gently. "Most searching for Varenthia's heir believed the bloodline entirely extinguished. Had she not been so thorough in erasing your trail, you likely would not have survived this long." Alaric studied the old maps carefully, his mind working through strategic implications far beyond simple family history. "If my uncle suspects the truth," he said slowly, "then this goes beyond simple ambition for the Thornwood title. He may be attempting to use Alira's identity as leverage against parties who benefited from Varenthia's fall. Meaning he intends either to control her claim," Godfrey said, "or eliminate her before she becomes an inconvenient complication for those same parties." Alira felt a chill settle deep within her chest. She had spent years believing herself simply hidden, forgotten, safe, within her own carefully constructed anonymity. The idea that powerful men still calculated around the possibility of her survival unsettled her deeply. "We need proof of Edmund's intentions," Alaric said finally. "Something concrete enough to expose him before he can act against us first." "There may be a way," Godfrey offered carefully. "Records exist, hidden within the old capital archives, detailing exactly which noble houses profited most directly from Varenthia's destruction. If Edmund's family appears among them, it would explain his desperate interest in ensuring Alira never surfaces publicly." "Then we retrieve those records," Alaric said firmly. "That journey carries considerable risk," Godfrey warned. "The capital archives are heavily monitored, and any inquiry into Varenthia's fall draws immediate attention from those still invested in keeping that history buried." "I have faced worse risks recently," Alaric said, glancing briefly toward Alira, then a dusty archive guarded by bored clerks. Despite the tension pressing down upon them, a small, unexpected smile flickered across Alira's face at his dry remark, the first genuine moment of lightness she had felt in days. Preparations began quietly the following morning. Alaric arranged a trip to the capital under the guise of routine estate business, careful not to draw unwanted suspicion. Alira insisted on accompanying him, unwilling to remain behind while decisions affecting her own fate unfolded elsewhere. "It would be safer for you to stay," Alaric said, though without much conviction, already anticipating her refusal. "Safety has rarely been something I could rely upon," Alira replied evenly. I would rather face danger directly than wait anxiously for news of it. Alaric studied her for a long moment before nodding, recognizing the same quiet strength he had come to respect deeply since her arrival. Then we go together, he said simply. The journey toward the capital proved tense, every unfamiliar rider along the road, drawing careful scrutiny from both of them. Alira found herself instinctively cataloging exits, potential dangers, and escape routes, old habits resurfacing swiftly, despite years spent trying to abandon them. Upon arriving at the capital, Godfrey guided them quietly toward the lesser-known archive housed beneath an old university building, rarely visited by anyone beyond dedicated scholars uninterested in current political matters. Still, entering required careful navigation of watchful guards stationed nearby, remnants of old security measures established after Varenthia's fall to prevent exactly this kind of historical inquiry. Inside the archive, dust hung thick in the air, shelves stacked high with forgotten records nobody had reason to disturb in decades. Godfrey moved with practiced familiarity, pulling specific ledgers from carefully memorized locations. Here, he said finally, spreading a large record book across a reading table. Trade agreements finalized within months of Varenthia's fall, granting significant territory and resources to allied houses who supported the uprising. Alaric scanned the pages quickly, his expression darkening, as familiar names appeared repeatedly throughout the transactions. My family's name appears here, he said slowly, though not directly tied to Edmund. My father's signature, authorizing resource redistribution following the coup. Alira's breath caught. Your father was involved? It appears so, Alaric admitted grimly. Though whether willingly or under pressure from allies remains unclear, Edmund's signature appears far more prominently, alongside several noble houses still influential within the current court. The weight of the discovery settled heavily over all three of them. Not only did the Thornwood family carry unexpected ties to Varenthia's destruction, but Edmund himself appeared deeply embedded within the very network of power that had profited most directly from it. This explains his desperation, Godfrey said quietly. If Alira's survival becomes public knowledge, questions will inevitably arise regarding exactly how these resources were acquired, and by whom. Meaning exposing me publicly would not simply endanger my own safety, Alira said slowly, but could dismantle an entire network of powerful alliances built upon Varenthia's downfall. Precisely, Godfrey confirmed. Which makes you far more dangerous to men like Edmund than a simple lost heir seeking justice. You represent evidence capable of destroying reputations, fortunes, and political standing, built over 20 years. Alaric closed the ledger slowly, his expression hardening with quiet resolve. Then we must move carefully, he said. Exposing this information recklessly could place both of us, and potentially the entire kingdom's stability, at serious risk. But sitting idly while Edmund plots against us carries equal danger. As they prepared to leave the archive, careful to avoid drawing attention from the guards stationed outside, Godfrey paused suddenly, his expression tightening with alarm. Someone followed us here, he whispered urgently, gesturing toward a figure lingering near the archive entrance, watching them with far too much interest for an ordinary passerby. Alira's pulse quickened instantly, old instincts flooding back with practiced efficiency. We need another way out, she said quietly, already scanning the room for alternative exits. Alaric nodded once, understanding immediately the gravity of the situation. Whatever fragile safety they had believed themselves to possess within the capital's crowded streets had just evaporated entirely, replaced instead by the unsettling certainty that Edmund's reach extended far closer than any of them had anticipated. The watcher near the archive entrance moved the moment Alira's eyes met his, slipping quickly into the crowded street outside. Alaric caught Godfrey's arm before he could follow. Let him go, Alaric said quietly. Chasing him only confirms what he already suspects. We move separately and meet again at the safe house near the Eastern Market. They split apart, weaving through the busy capital streets, each taking a different path to avoid drawing further attention. Alira moved with practiced calm, blending into the crowd the way she had learned to do years ago during her time fleeing from town to town. Every instinct told her the danger had shifted from distant possibility to immediate reality. By the time they reunited at the small rented room near the Eastern Market, the sun had begun sinking low over the capital's rooftops. Godfrey arrived last, slightly out of breath, his expression grim. He was one of Edmund's men, Godfrey confirmed. I recognized his uniform beneath the plain cloak. Edmund knows we searched the archives. Then he knows we found the trade records, Alaric said, pacing the small room with restless energy. Which means he will act quickly now, before we can use that information against him. Alira sat quietly near the window, her mind working through the tangled danger surrounding them. If Edmund fears exposure, she said slowly, his safest option is to eliminate me, before I can publicly reveal my identity. My survival alone threatens everything he has built. We return to Thornwood immediately, Alaric said firmly. Better to face this threat within walls we control, than remain exposed here in the capital. The journey back proved tense and swift. The horses pushed harder than comfort allowed. Alira remained alert throughout, watching every shadow along the road, every rider passing too closely for casual coincidence. By the time Thornwood Castle's familiar towers came into view, exhaustion had settled deep into all three travelers, though none dared fully relax their guard. That night, after Godfrey retired to rest, Alaric found Alira standing quietly in the castle's private chapel, a place she had rarely visited since her arrival. Candles flickered softly around her, casting gentle light across features drawn tight with worry. You should be resting, Alaric said gently, stepping inside. I find it difficult to rest, Alira admitted, knowing that simply existing places you and everyone connected to me in danger. Alaric moved closer, standing beside her in comfortable silence for a long moment, before speaking again. When I agreed to this marriage, he said quietly, I convinced myself it was purely practical, an heir to secure my title, nothing more complicated than that. I never anticipated caring what became of the woman I married. Alira turned to face him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. And now? Now I find myself unwilling to imagine this house without you in it, Alaric admitted, his voice rough with unfamiliar emotion. Whatever danger your identity brings, I no longer wish to face it from a distance. I wish to face it beside you. For a long moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken feeling settling gently between them. Alira reached out slowly, taking his hand in hers, an act of trust more significant than any words could express. Then let us face it together, she said softly, though I fear the road ahead will only grow more difficult. Their quiet moment was interrupted by hurried footsteps echoing down the corridor. A guard burst into the chapel, breathless and alarmed. My lord, he said urgently. Riders approach from the southern road, moving quickly under Lord Edmund's banner. Alaric's expression hardened instantly, protective instinct overriding the tenderness of moments before. How many? 12 at least, my lord, armed and moving with clear purpose. Prepare the household, Alaric ordered swiftly. Alira, stay close to me. They moved quickly toward the main hall, servants scrambling to secure doors and gather defensive positions throughout the castle. Alira's mind raced through possibilities, old survival instincts sharpening every sense as danger drew steadily closer. Edmund's riders arrived within the hour, positioning themselves just beyond the castle gates. Edmund himself rode at the front, his expression calm, despite the obvious threat his presence carried. Nephew, Edmund called out smoothly, I come only to discuss a matter of family importance. Surely you would not deny your own uncle's simple conversation. Your idea of conversation recently has included assassins in the forest, Alaric called back coldly. Forgive my hesitation to extend hospitality. Edmund's smile did not waver. A regrettable misunderstanding, I assure you. I come now with an offer instead, one I believe your wife will find particularly relevant to her interests. Alira's pulse quickened, standing just behind Alaric at the castle entrance. Edmund's gaze shifted deliberately toward her, confirming instantly that whatever games of subtlety had existed before were now entirely abandoned. I know precisely who you are, Elowin Varenthian, Edmund called out, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard, loud enough for gathered servants and guards to hear clearly. The lost princess of a fallen kingdom, hiding quietly within my nephew's household. Gasps rippled through the assembled staff, shock and confusion spreading rapidly. Alaric stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself protectively before Alira. Careful, uncle, he warned coldly. Baseless accusations carry consequences. Baseless? Edmund laughed lightly. I have proof enough to convince any court of her true identity. Proof I am willing to keep quiet in exchange for reasonable terms. What terms? Alaric demanded. Simple enough, Edmund said smoothly. Relinquish the Thornwood title peacefully, allowing rightful inheritance to pass to my branch of the family, as tradition originally intended. In exchange, I will ensure your wife's secret remains protected from those who might otherwise wish her permanent silence. Elira's blood ran cold at the implication hidden within his words. Edmund was not merely threatening exposure. He was offering himself as her only protection against far more dangerous forces, already aware of her survival. Forces willing to ensure she never lived long enough to reclaim anything at all. And if I refuse? Alaric asked, his voice steady, despite the tension visibly coiling within him. Edmund's smile finally faded, replaced by cold calculation. Then I cannot guarantee her safety, once certain parties learn precisely where the lost princess has been hiding all this time. Silence stretched heavily across the courtyard, broken only by the restless shifting of horses and the quiet murmur of shocked servants. Elira stepped forward suddenly, surprising both Alaric and Edmund with her composure. I will not hide behind bargains built on threats, she said clearly, her voice carrying steady strength despite the fear coiling tightly within her chest. If my identity must become known, then let it become known on my terms, not through blackmail disguised as family negotiation. Edmund's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly unprepared for such direct defiance. A bold statement, he said carefully, from a woman with far more to lose than she perhaps realizes. Perhaps, Elira replied evenly, but I have spent 20 years living in fear of exactly this moment. I find I have little patience left for further threats. Alaric glanced toward her, quiet admiration flickering behind his guarded expression, before turning back toward his uncle with renewed resolve. You have your answer, uncle. Leave now, before this confrontation becomes something neither of us wishes to explain to the crown. Edmund studied them both for a long, tense moment, before finally signaling his riders to withdraw. This is far from finished, he called back, as he turned his horse toward the southern road. Consider carefully what you are choosing to protect, nephew. Not every enemy will offer terms as generous as mine. As Edmund's riders disappeared down the distant road, the courtyard remained heavy with stunned silence. Servants exchanged uncertain glances, whispers already beginning to spread regarding the shocking revelation they had just witnessed firsthand. Elira turned to Alaric, her composure finally beginning to crack beneath the weight of everything unfolding around her. It is done now, she said quietly. There is no returning to hidden anonymity after this. No, Alaric agreed, taking her hand gently within his own. But perhaps hiding was never truly going to save you in the end. Perhaps facing this openly, together, is the only path that offers any real chance at safety. Elira looked toward the horizon, where Edmund's riders had vanished, uncertainty and fragile hope mingling uneasily within her chest. Whatever quiet life she had once hoped to build within Thornwood's walls had shattered completely with Edmund's public declaration. Now, only the truth remained, and the truth carried consequences far greater than either of them could yet fully comprehend. Elira woke suddenly to the sound of shattering glass somewhere below her chamber, her body reacting before her mind fully understood the danger. She rolled from the bed instinctively, pressing herself against the wall beside the door, listening carefully as hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. The door burst open moments later, revealing Alaric, sword already drawn, relief flooding his face the instant he saw her standing safely. An intruder broke through the kitchen window, he said quickly. Guards are searching the grounds now. Elira followed him swiftly toward the main hall, where servants had gathered nervously near the entrance, whispering anxiously among themselves. Nora approached quickly, her expression tight with worry. They caught him near the stables, my lord. A hired blade, though he refuses to speak of who sent him. There is no mystery in who sent him, Alaric said grimly. Edmund grows bolder now that our secret has spread beyond these walls. Since the confrontation in the courtyard days earlier, word of Elira's true identity had spread quickly through the household, servants whispering the name Elwyn Varenthian with a mixture of awe and fear. Though the wider kingdom remained unaware, Alaric knew it was only a matter of time before rumors traveled beyond Thornwood's borders entirely. Later that morning, as guards questioned the captured intruder within the castle dungeon, Elira sat quietly in the small garden, her hands trembling slightly from the lingering shock of the night before. Nora joined her, carrying a cup of warm tea and an expression of quiet concern. "You have not been sleeping well," Nora observed gently. "How could I?" Elira admitted softly, "knowing that danger now follows me openly, rather than hiding in shadows as it once did." Nora sat beside her, patting her hand comfortingly. "You are stronger than you realize, child. I have watched you manage this household with more skill than any duchess before you. Do not let fear diminish that strength now." Elira offered a small, grateful smile, though worry still lingered heavily within her chest. As Nora rose to return to her duties, a sudden wave of dizziness swept over Elira, forcing her to steady herself against the garden bench. "Are you unwell?" Nora asked immediately, concern deepening. "Simply tired," Elira assured her, though something in the sensation felt unfamiliar, different from ordinary exhaustion. Over the following days, the dizziness returned intermittently, accompanied by a persistent tiredness Elira could not fully explain. When the castle physician finally examined her at Alaric's insistence, his expression shifted into careful surprise. "My lady," he said gently, "you are with child." The words settled over Elira with overwhelming weight, joy, and terror tangling together instantly within her chest. She had barely processed the danger surrounding her own survival, and now an entirely new life depended upon her ability to navigate that danger successfully. When she told Alaric that evening, his reaction surprised her deeply. Rather than the calculated satisfaction she might have expected from a man who had married her specifically to secure an heir, his expression softened into something far more vulnerable, something resembling genuine wonder. "A child," he repeated quietly, as though testing the reality of the words. "Our child." "Alaric," Elira said carefully, "this changes everything. If Edmund learns of this pregnancy, the danger multiplies far beyond what either of us currently faces." "I know," Alaric admitted, stepping closer, gently placing his hand against her still flat stomach with careful reverence. "But I find myself unable to feel anything but hope alongside the fear." Elira covered his hand with her own, allowing herself, if only briefly, to feel the same fragile hope reflected in his eyes. "This child will carry the blood of 2 kingdoms," she said softly. "Varenthia's fallen crown, and Thornwood's noble line combined. Then we protect that child fiercely," Alaric said firmly, "regardless of whatever storm continues gathering around us." That night, unable to sleep despite exhaustion weighing heavily upon her, Elira wandered quietly toward the castle library, searching for any remaining historical records that might offer guidance regarding Varenthia's fall and the dangers still lingering from it. She found Godfrey there instead, poring over documents by candlelight, his expression troubled. "You are awake late," she observed softly. "As are you," Godfrey replied, gesturing for her to join him. "I have been researching further, attempting to understand exactly which powerful houses remain most invested in ensuring Varenthia's history stays buried." "And what have you found?" Godfrey hesitated before answering, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "The current king benefited significantly from Varenthia's destruction," he said finally. "His own claim to certain territories relies heavily upon the assumption that no surviving heir remains to challenge those boundaries." Elira's breath caught sharply. "The king himself is involved?" "Not directly in the original uprising," Godfrey clarified, "but deeply invested in maintaining the current arrangement of power that resulted from it. Should you reveal yourself publicly, the king would face serious questions regarding the legitimacy of territories he currently controls." The weight of this new information settled heavily over Elira. She had believed Edmund alone posed the greatest threat to her safety, yet the reality reaching far higher into the kingdom's power structure felt infinitely more dangerous. "Does Alaric know this?" she asked quietly. "Not yet," Godfrey admitted. "I only confirmed the details tonight." Elira sat quietly for a long moment, processing the enormity of what her survival truly threatened. This was no longer simply about protecting herself or securing Thornwood's inheritance. Her existence alone challenged the legitimacy of the very crown ruling the kingdom. The following morning, she shared Godfrey's findings with Alaric, watching carefully as understanding settled grimly across his features. "If the king becomes aware of your survival," he said slowly, "he will not hesitate to eliminate the threat entirely, regardless of any pretense toward justice or mercy. Then perhaps, remaining hidden was always the safer path." Illyra said quietly. Though even as she spoke the words, she recognized their futility. Edmund already knew. Servants already whispered her true name throughout the household. Complete secrecy no longer remained a realistic option. Hiding did not protect you before, Alaric reminded her gently. It only delayed the inevitable. Perhaps the only true safety now lies in gathering strength before your identity becomes fully exposed, rather than waiting anxiously for exposure to happen on someone else's terms. Gathering what strength? Illyra asked. Allies? Armies? I am one woman, with a fading claim to a kingdom destroyed 20 years ago. You are also carrying an heir to 2 significant houses, Alaric said carefully, and you possess evidence directly implicating powerful men in Varenthia's fall. That is not nothing, Illyra. That is leverage, should we choose to use it wisely rather than fearfully. Illyra considered his words carefully, old instincts warring against newfound hope. For years, survival had meant remaining invisible, avoiding attention at every cost. Yet perhaps, as Alaric suggested, true safety now required the opposite approach entirely, stepping fully into the truth, rather than continuing to hide from it. If we do this, she said slowly, we cannot act carelessly. We need allies who genuinely support restoring balance, not merely opportunists seeking advantage from chaos. Then we begin identifying those allies, Alaric said firmly, quietly, before Edmund or anyone connected to the crown realizes exactly what we intend to build. Godfrey nodded in agreement, already flipping through additional pages of historical records. There remain scattered loyalists throughout the kingdom, he said, families who quietly opposed Varenthia's destruction at the time. Though they lacked the strength to resist openly, they may yet remember loyalty to that fallen crown. As the 3 of them began carefully mapping potential allies and dangers alike, Illyra felt something shift within her, a quiet resolve replacing years of fearful hiding. Whatever storm approached, she would no longer face it as a frightened girl running from shadows. She would face it as Elowen Varenthian, carrying not only her own survival, but the future of the child growing within her, and perhaps, if fate allowed, the restoration of a kingdom long believed entirely lost. Outside the castle walls, however, Edmund had already begun making his own arrangements, sending careful word toward the capital, ensuring that certain powerful ears within the royal court would soon learn precisely what dangerous truth continued growing quietly within Thornwood's protected walls. A rider arrived at Thornwood Castle bearing the royal seal, and the entire household fell silent the moment word spread of his presence. Alaric received him in the main hall, Illyra standing carefully beside him, her heart pounding despite her outwardly composed expression. His Majesty requests the Duke's presence at court within the fortnight, the rider announced formally, to discuss matters concerning recent disturbances within Thornwood's lands. Alaric accepted the summons with practiced calm, though the moment the rider departed, tension flooded the hall. Disturbances, Alaric repeated grimly. Edmund has already reached the king's ear. Or, someone connected to him has, Godfrey added, his expression tightening with concern. This summons feels far too deliberate to be coincidence. Illyra felt the weight of dread settle heavily within her chest. If the king suspects my survival, she said quietly, attending court directly places you in tremendous danger, Alaric. Refusing the summons would be equally dangerous, Alaric replied. It would confirm suspicion rather than address it directly. I must attend, and I must do so carefully. Then I go with you, Illyra said firmly. Absolutely not, Alaric said immediately. If the court suspects your identity, appearing before them directly could result in immediate danger, especially given your condition. Remaining hidden here offers no true safety either, Illyra argued. If something happens to you at court, I would be left utterly alone, vulnerable to whatever forces move against us next. Their argument continued late into the evening, both driven by genuine fear for the other's safety rather than stubbornness alone. Eventually, a compromise emerged. Illyra would travel toward the capital separately, remaining hidden under Godfrey's careful protection at a discreet location nearby, close enough to act should circumstances require it, yet distanced enough to avoid immediate exposure. The following days passed in tense preparation. Alaric gathered loyal guards willing to accompany him to court, while Godfrey quietly reached out to scattered contacts who might still hold sympathy toward Varenthia's lost line. Slowly, A small network of cautious allies began forming, families who remembered old loyalties buried beneath decades of enforced silence. Among them was Lady Wren Ashcombe, an elderly noblewoman whose family had quietly opposed the original uprising against Varenthia, though they had lacked the strength to resist openly at the time. When Godfrey approached her carefully, with veiled hints regarding a surviving heir, her reaction confirmed exactly what they had hoped to find. "If what you suggest is true," Lady Wren said carefully, her sharp eyes studying Godfrey intently, "then know that my family's loyalty to that fallen crown never truly faded, merely waited patiently for circumstances to shift." "Circumstances have indeed shifted," Godfrey confirmed quietly. Lady Wren's support proved invaluable, connecting them quietly with several other noble houses harboring similar hidden sympathies. Slowly, carefully, a foundation of support began forming beneath the surface of the kingdom's political landscape, unnoticed by those still comfortably benefiting from Varenthia's destruction. Meanwhile, Alaric arrived at the capital, the royal palace looming grand and imposing before him. He was received formally by court officials before being led toward the throne room, where King Baldric awaited, flanked by several advisors whose expressions revealed little beyond practiced neutrality. "Duke Thornwood," King Baldric greeted, his tone carrying deceptive warmth. "I trust the journey treated you well." "Well enough, Your Majesty," Alaric replied carefully. "I understand there have been disturbances within your lands recently," the king continued smoothly. "Attempts upon your life, and rather curious rumors circulating regarding your new duchess." Alaric kept his expression carefully neutral, though tension coiled tightly within him. "Rumors circulate constantly within noble circles, Your Majesty. I would not place undue weight upon idle gossip." "Perhaps," the king said, studying him carefully, "yet these particular rumors carry rather specific detail. A hidden mark, a lost bloodline believed extinguished 20 years ago. Surely you understand my interest in such matters, given the historical significance involved." "I understand Your Majesty's caution regarding old history," Alaric replied evenly, "though I would caution against placing faith in unverified rumor, particularly when such rumors may originate from those seeking personal advantage through manufactured scandal." The king's eyes narrowed slightly, clearly recognizing the implied accusation toward Edmund without requiring direct confirmation. "Your uncle has indeed brought certain concerns to my attention," he admitted carefully. "Concerns regarding your household stability and the legitimacy of your current marriage." "My marriage remains entirely legitimate, Your Majesty," Alaric said firmly. "Whatever concerns my uncle raises likely stem more from his own ambitions toward my title than genuine worry for the kingdom's stability." A tense silence stretched across the throne room before the king finally spoke again, his tone shifting subtly. "I will require further proof before acting upon rumors alone, Duke Thornwood. However, I would advise you strongly to resolve whatever situation exists within your household, swiftly and quietly, before it grows into something neither of us can easily control." "I intend to do exactly that, Your Majesty," Alaric replied, bowing respectfully, before being dismissed from the throne room. Outside the palace, Alaric's relief at surviving the audience unscathed remained tempered by clear understanding that the king's patience carried firm limits. Whatever fragile peace existed now would not last indefinitely. That evening, he met quietly with Alira and Godfrey at their discreet location outside the capital, relaying details of his tense conversation with the king. Alira listened carefully, her expression tightening with each troubling revelation. "The king already suspects the truth," she said finally. "He simply lacks concrete proof to act openly." "For now," Alaric agreed grimly. "But Edmund will not stop seeking that proof. We must move faster than he does." Lady Wren, who had accompanied them quietly to offer her support directly, spoke up thoughtfully. "There may be another path forward," she suggested. "Rather than waiting fearfully for exposure forced upon us by enemies, perhaps it is time to consider revealing the truth ourselves, carefully, on terms we control, rather than terms dictated by Edmund or the crown." "That is an enormous risk," Godfrey cautioned. "Continuing to hide carries equal risk," Lady Wren countered. "At least revealing the truth deliberately allows us to control the narrative, to present Elowin's survival, alongside evidence of the corruption surrounding Varenthia's fall, rather than allowing Edmund to control how that truth eventually emerges." Alira considered this carefully. old fear warring against newfound resolve. She thought of the child growing within her, of the fragile alliances slowly forming around her, of the 20 years spent hiding from a truth that refused to remain buried indefinitely. "If we choose this path," she said slowly, "there is no retreating from it afterward. Once revealed, we commit fully to whatever consequences follow." "I understand the weight of that choice," Alaric said quietly, taking her hand gently within his own. "But I believe continuing to hide only delays inevitable danger, rather than preventing it entirely. Whatever path we choose, I intend to stand beside you fully, regardless of the risk involved." Alira looked around at the small group gathered before her, allies bound together by fragile hope and old loyalty toward a kingdom long believed entirely lost. Slowly, she nodded, resolve settling firmly within her despite the fear still trembling quietly beneath the surface. "Then let us prepare carefully," she said finally, "and choose the moment of revelation ourselves, rather than allowing Edmund or the crown to choose it for us." As the small group began mapping careful strategy long into the night, none of them yet realized that fate itself was already moving swiftly toward forcing their hand far sooner than any of them anticipated, as a royal envoy from a distant kingdom prepared to arrive within the capital, carrying questions of his own regarding Varenthia's lost bloodline. The great hall of the royal palace buzzed with tension the moment the foreign envoy strode through its doors, his presence commanding immediate attention from every noble gathered for the seasonal court gathering. Lord Callum Ashworth, representing the distant kingdom of Selvaroon, carried himself with quiet authority, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled crowd as though searching for something specific among the glittering nobility. Alaric and Alira had arrived at court together that evening, having finally decided the time had come to control the narrative themselves rather than wait passively for exposure forced upon them. Alira wore a gown of deep blue, elegant yet understated, her composure carefully steadied despite the storm of nerves churning beneath her calm exterior. King Baldric greeted the envoy formally, though his expression carried wary curiosity. "Lord Ashworth," the king said smoothly, "Selvaroon rarely sends envoys without significant purpose. To what do we owe this visit?" "Your Majesty," Callum replied respectfully, "I come seeking information regarding a matter our kingdom has pursued diligently for many years, the survival of Varenthia's royal bloodline." Murmurs rippled instantly through the gathered court, nobles exchanging startled glances at the bold declaration. King Baldric's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, though his voice remained carefully controlled. "Varenthia's line ended 20 years ago, Lord Ashworth. Surely, you are aware of this well-documented history." "Documented, perhaps," Callum replied evenly, though not entirely accurate. "Selvaroon has maintained careful watch over rumors suggesting a surviving heir for many years, rumors that have recently grown considerably stronger." Alira's heart pounded painfully within her chest, as every eye in the hall seemed to shift subtly toward speculation, though no one yet knew precisely where to direct their suspicion. Beside her, Alaric's hand found hers briefly, a silent gesture of support amid the mounting tension. "Selvaroon's interest in this matter," King Baldric said carefully, "seems rather unusual, after 2 decades of silence on the subject." "Our interest," Callum replied smoothly, "stems from an old alliance forged generations ago between our kingdoms, an alliance Varenthia's destruction unfortunately severed. Should a legitimate heir still exist, our kingdom stands ready to honor that alliance once again, offering support and recognition to re-establish Varenthia's rightful place." The implications of his words settled heavily across the hall. An alliance with Selvaroon, one of the most powerful kingdoms in the region, would grant enormous legitimacy and protection to any surviving heir bold enough to step forward. King Baldric's expression darkened slightly, clearly recognizing the political complications such an alliance would create for his own claims over territories once belonging to Varenthia. "A noble sentiment," the king said carefully, "though I fear you may find your search ultimately fruitless." Varenthia's bloodline ended completely that terrible night. Alira felt the weight of the moment pressing down upon her, the careful plans she and Alaric had discussed suddenly feeling insufficient against the reality of standing within this glittering, dangerous hall. She glanced toward Alaric, finding steady reassurance in his gaze, silent permission to choose whatever path felt right in this critical moment. Before she could decide, however, movement stirred near the hall's entrance. Edmund Thornwood strode forward confidently, having clearly anticipated exactly this opportunity to strike. "Your Majesty," Edmund announced loudly, his voice carrying easily across the suddenly silent hall. "I believe I can offer clarity regarding Lord Ashworth's inquiry." Alira's blood ran cold, as every eye in the hall shifted immediately toward her and Alaric. "My nephew's wife," Edmund continued, gesturing directly toward Alira, "carries a mark upon her wrist, matching precisely the description of Varenthia's lost royal bloodline. I have suspected her true identity for some time now." Gasps and murmurs erupted instantly throughout the hall, nobles turning to stare openly at Alira, whose careful composure threatened to crack beneath the sudden weight of dozens of curious, calculating gazes. King Baldric's expression shifted rapidly from surprise toward something colder, more dangerous. "Is this true?" the king demanded, his voice carrying sharp authority throughout the hall. Alaric stepped forward protectively, though Alira gently placed her hand upon his arm, silently indicating her intention to face this moment directly, rather than allowing him to shield her entirely. "It is true," Alira said clearly, her voice steady, despite the trembling fear beneath her calm exterior. "My name is Elowyn Varenthian, daughter of the royal house destroyed 20 years ago. I have spent my life hiding not out of shame, but out of necessity, protecting myself from those who wished to ensure no survivor remained to challenge what had been taken." The hall fell into stunned silence, the weight of her admission settling heavily over every noble present. Lord Callum Ashworth stepped forward immediately, his expression shifting into something resembling genuine relief. "Then, Selvarune's search finally reaches its conclusion," Callum said firmly. "Our kingdom stands ready to recognize your claim, Princess Elowyn, and to honor the alliance our kingdoms once shared." King Baldric's expression darkened further, clearly recognizing the dangerous shift in political power this recognition threatened to create. "This is a matter requiring careful verification," the king said quickly, attempting to regain control over the rapidly shifting situation. "Wild claims cannot simply be accepted without thorough investigation. I carry proof beyond the mark alone," Alira said firmly, drawing a folded document from within her gown. Evidence Godfrey had carefully prepared, detailing the trade agreements and territorial redistributions following Varenthia's fall. Records detailing exactly which noble houses profited from my family's destruction, including territories the crown itself currently holds. The implication hung heavily in the air, a direct challenge to the king's own legitimacy regarding certain contested lands. King Baldric's expression tightened with barely restrained fury, though he remained carefully composed before the watching court. "Such documents can easily be forged," the king said coldly. "Then let scholars and historians verify their authenticity," Alaric interjected firmly, stepping forward beside Alira. "My wife has nothing to hide, Your Majesty, unlike certain parties who clearly benefit significantly from ensuring Varenthia's heir remained believed dead." The pointed remark drew sharp attention toward Edmund, whose confident expression faltered slightly, as murmurs of suspicion began shifting subtly away from Alira and toward himself. "This is absurd," Edmund said quickly, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "I merely brought forward information I believed relevant to the crown's security. Information you have clearly known for some time," Alaric countered coldly, choosing to reveal it now, at court, in the most public manner possible, rather than addressing it privately, as family matters typically warrant. "One wonders what advantage you hope to gain through such dramatic timing." Whispers of suspicion continued rippling through the hall, nobles exchanging uncertain glances as the situation shifted rapidly beyond anyone's initial control. King Baldric, recognizing the delicate political tightrope now stretched before him, raised his hand for silence. "This matter requires careful deliberation," the king announced firmly. "Princess Elowyn's claim, if genuine, carries significant implications for numerous territories and alliances. I will not make hasty judgments regarding matters of such importance. Nor should you, Your Majesty," Lord Callum agreed smoothly. "However, Selvarune stands firmly prepared to support the princess's legitimate claim, regardless of whatever deliberation the crown chooses to undertake." The unspoken threat within his words was clear enough. Selvarune's support meant powerful military and political backing, a complication King Baldric could not simply dismiss, regardless of his own reluctance to acknowledge Alira's claim. As the court gathering dissolved into anxious murmuring and hurried private conversations, Alaric guided Elira quickly away from the overwhelming attention, finding a quiet alcove where she finally allowed her composed exterior to crack slightly, exhaustion and lingering fear flooding through her. "You did well," Alaric said gently, pulling her carefully into a protective embrace. "I do not know if well is the correct word," Elira admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But it is done now. There is no returning to hiding after tonight." "No," Alaric agreed quietly. "There is not. But you are no longer facing this alone, Elowen. Whatever comes next, you have allies now, powerful ones, standing openly beside you." Elira allowed herself a small measure of comfort in his words, though uncertainty regarding what dangerous consequences tonight's revelation might yet bring continued weighing heavily upon her mind. Somewhere within the palace, she knew, King Baldric was already calculating his next move, and Edmund, having lost control over the narrative he had hoped to shape, would not simply retreat quietly into failure. The storm she had spent 20 years fleeing had finally, irrevocably, arrived. Word reached Thornwood Castle before dawn that royal soldiers had been dispatched toward the eastern road, moving with clear purpose, despite the early hour. Alaric read the hurried message from Lady Wren, with growing alarm, understanding immediately that King Baldric had chosen action over deliberation. "He means to silence this, before it spreads further," Alaric said grimly, showing the message to Elira, who stood beside him in the study, one hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her stomach. "Then we cannot remain here waiting for him to arrive," Elira said firmly. "We must move first, gather what allies we can, before the crown's forces reach us." Godfrey entered quickly, his expression tight with urgency. "Lady Wren has already begun rallying support among the noble houses sympathetic to Verenthia's cause. Several have pledged soldiers, though not enough yet to withstand direct confrontation with royal forces." "Then we need more than noble houses alone," Alaric said, pacing thoughtfully. "Lord Callum offered Selvarune's support. Perhaps it is time to formally request it." Within hours, a rider departed swiftly toward the capital, carrying an urgent message toward Lord Callum, requesting immediate assistance. Meanwhile, preparations began throughout Thornwood Castle, guards reinforcing defenses, allies quietly gathering from surrounding estates sympathetic to the growing rebellion. Commander Tobias Hale, a grizzled soldier who had served the Thornwood family loyally for over 20 years, arrived to offer his sword and considerable military experience. "I served your father faithfully, my lord," Tobias said firmly to Alaric, "though I always harbored quiet doubts regarding certain decisions made during Verenthia's fall. If there is a chance to correct old wrongs, I stand ready to fight for it." His words echoed a sentiment quietly shared among several older soldiers and noble families throughout the region, guilt long buried beneath decades of enforced silence, finally finding voice through Elira's unexpected survival. As preparations continued, however, danger arrived far sooner than anticipated. A scout returned breathlessly one afternoon, reporting royal soldiers approaching swiftly from the southern road, their numbers far greater than initially estimated. "We cannot withstand direct confrontation yet," Tobias warned urgently. "Our allies remain scattered, not yet fully organized into a cohesive force." "Then we buy time," Alaric decided quickly. "Elira, you must leave immediately, somewhere safe, until Selvarune's support arrives, or our allies fully mobilize." "I will not run while you remain here facing danger alone," Elira said firmly, old fear warring against fierce protective instinct toward the man she had come to love deeply, despite the unconventional beginning of their marriage. "You carry our child," Alaric reminded her gently, though urgency colored his tone. "Protecting that child means protecting yourself, even when everything within you resists retreating." Elira closed her eyes briefly, torn between instinct and reason. Finally, she nodded reluctantly, understanding the wisdom behind his insistence, even as it pained her deeply to leave him facing danger without her beside him. Godfrey and a small trusted guard escorted her quietly toward a hidden estate belonging to Lady Wren, tucked safely within dense forest, far from the main roads. From there, she continued coordinating carefully with allies through careful messages, refusing to remain entirely passive, despite the physical distance now separating her from Alaric. Meanwhile, at Thornwood Castle, Alaric and Tobias organized what defenses they could manage. rallying loyal soldiers and preparing for confrontation they knew could not be avoided entirely. When royal forces finally arrived at Thornwood's gates, their commander, a stern man bearing the king's personal seal, called out formally toward the castle walls. "Duke Thornwood, you stand accused of harboring a fugitive against the crown's explicit interest. Surrender the woman known as Elwyn Varenthian immediately, or face the consequences of open defiance against His Majesty's authority." "She is not here," Alaric called back evenly. "And even if she were, I would not surrender my wife to face judgment without proper trial and evidence, presented fairly before impartial witnesses." "This is not a negotiation, Duke Thornwood," the commander replied coldly. "Cooperate, or we will be forced to consider your household in open rebellion against the crown." Tension stretched taut across the standoff, neither side willing to back down entirely. Alaric understood clearly that outright battle against royal forces without adequate allies would end disastrously. Yet surrendering entirely felt equally unacceptable, given everything Alira had already sacrificed to reach this point. Fortunately, reinforcements began arriving, just as tension threatened to break into open conflict. Riders bearing Selvarune's banner appeared along the northern road, Lord Callum himself leading a modest but well-trained force, sent swiftly in response to Alaric's urgent request. "Duke Thornwood," Callum called out as his forces arrived, positioning themselves visibly alongside Thornwood's own defenders. "Selvarune stands firmly behind Princess Elwyn's legitimate claim. I would advise the Crown's forces to reconsider their current course of action carefully." The royal commander's expression tightened with obvious frustration, clearly unprepared for foreign intervention arriving so swiftly and decisively. Recognizing the shifting balance of power now standing visibly before him, he withdrew his forces cautiously, though his parting words carried clear warning. "This matter remains unresolved," he called back as his soldiers retreated. "The Crown will not simply accept foreign interference in matters of internal justice." As the immediate threat receded, Alaric allowed himself a brief moment of relief before urgency reasserted itself firmly. "This buys us time," he said to Tobias and Callum, "but not resolution. The king will not accept this setback quietly. Then we must move quickly to consolidate support before he regroups his forces." Callum agreed firmly. "Selvarune stands ready to support Princess Elwyn's claim formally, though true stability will require broader recognition throughout the kingdom itself." Word was sent immediately toward Alira, informing her of the successful defense and urging her cautious return now that immediate danger had receded. When she arrived back at Thornwood Castle later that evening, relief and lingering fear mingled visibly across her features as she embraced Alaric tightly. "I feared the worst," she admitted quietly. "As did I," Alaric confessed, holding her close. "But we have gained crucial time, and powerful allies, willing to stand openly beside our cause." Over the following days, momentum continued building steadily. More noble houses, encouraged by Selvarune's open support and the Crown's clear reluctance toward direct confrontation, began pledging their allegiance openly toward Alira's legitimate claim. Old guilt buried since Varenthia's fall resurfaced throughout the kingdom. Families quietly acknowledging complicity in past wrongs, eager now to correct historical injustice through supporting rightful restoration. Yet as support grew, so too did the king's desperation. Reports arrived quietly through Lady Wren's extensive network detailing frantic private meetings within the royal court, whispers of King Baldric considering increasingly drastic measures to prevent Alira's claim from gaining unstoppable momentum. "He grows desperate," Godfrey warned, during a private strategy meeting within Thornwood's study. "Desperate men often resort to measures far more dangerous than open confrontation." "Meaning?" Alira asked, unease coiling tightly within her chest. "Meaning we should expect attempts at more subtle interference," Godfrey said grimly. "Poison, sabotage, perhaps even attempts to discredit your claim through manufactured evidence or manipulated testimony." Alaric's expression hardened with protective resolve. "Then we remain vigilant," he said firmly, "and we move quickly toward formal resolution before the king finds opportunity to enact whatever desperate schemes he currently considers. You too." As preparations continued for what all involved understood would soon become a decisive confrontation, Alira found herself reflecting quietly upon the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. From a frightened seamstress entering a marriage of cold necessity, she now stood at the center of a kingdom's shifting balance of power, supported by allies she never could have imagined finding, and loved by a man who had once seen her only as a means toward securing an heir. Whatever dangers still lay ahead, she no longer faced them as the frightened, hidden girl she had been for 20 years. She faced them as Elwyn Varenthian, rightful heir to a fallen kingdom, standing openly and unafraid beside those who had chosen to fight for justice, long overdue. Word arrived that King Baldric had summoned a formal court hearing to address Alira's claim once and for all, and the entire kingdom seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of what promised to become a historic confrontation. Alaric read the summons carefully, his expression tight, with cautious hope, mingled with wary suspicion, regarding the king's true intentions. This could be a trap, Tobias warned, during their final preparations. An opportunity for the king to discredit the princess's claim publicly, surrounded by witnesses loyal to the crown. Or it could be genuine recognition that his position has grown untenable, Godfrey countered. Selvarune's support, combined with growing noble sympathy, leaves him little choice but to address this matter formally, rather than through further covert interference. Alira listened carefully to the debate, her hand resting gently upon her now visibly rounded stomach, the child within growing steadily stronger with each passing week. Whatever his true intention, she said finally, we cannot refuse this hearing. Doing so would only strengthen doubt regarding my legitimate claim. Then we prepare thoroughly, Alaric said firmly, ensuring every piece of evidence, every witness, every ally, stands ready to support you fully when the moment arrives. The day of the hearing arrived with tension thick enough to feel physically within the grand hall of the royal palace. Nobles from across the kingdom gathered, alongside representatives from Selvarune, all eager to witness the resolution of a controversy that had captured attention throughout every corner of noble society. King Baldric sat upon his throne, flanked by advisors whose expressions remained carefully neutral despite the obvious tension surrounding the proceedings. Alira stood before the assembled court, Alaric beside her, Godfrey and Lady Wren positioned nearby with carefully organized evidence prepared for exactly this moment. Princess Elwyn Varenthian, the king began formally, his tone carrying deliberate weight. You stand before this court, claiming legitimate heritage to a kingdom destroyed 20 years ago. Present your evidence clearly, that this court may judge your claim fairly. Alira stepped forward, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. I carry the mark passed through generations of Varenthia's royal bloodline, she said, drawing back her sleeve to reveal the faint shape upon her wrist for the assembled court to witness clearly. I carry memories, fragmented though they are, of the night my kingdom fell, of tunnels beneath a palace I barely remember, of a nurse who sacrificed everything to ensure my survival. Godfrey stepped forward next, presenting carefully preserved historical records. These documents, he explained clearly, detailed trade agreements and territorial redistributions finalized within months of Varenthia's destruction, evidence connecting numerous noble houses, including certain territories currently held by the crown itself, directly to profits gained from that kingdom's fall. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobility as scholars and appointed court historians examined the presented documents carefully, confirming their authenticity through careful scrutiny. King Baldric's expression remained carefully composed, though tension visibly tightened around his eyes as the evidence mounted steadily against easy dismissal. Lord Callum Ashworth spoke next, his voice carrying formal authority throughout the hall. Selvarune has maintained careful historical records regarding Varenthia's fall, records confirming rumors of a surviving heir that persisted for many years following the tragedy. Princess Elwyn's account aligns precisely with information our kingdom has quietly gathered over 2 decades. As evidence continued accumulating steadily, Edmund Thornwood, seated among the gathered nobility, shifted uncomfortably beneath mounting scrutiny, directed increasingly toward his own family's historical involvement in Varenthia's destruction. When questioned directly by court officials regarding his family's specific role in the territorial redistributions following the coup, his composed facade finally began crumbling under pressure. I acted upon my father's decisions, Edmund said defensively. Decisions made decades ago, decisions I bore no direct responsibility for. Yet you sought to use knowledge of Princess Elwyn's survival for personal political advantage, Alaric interjected firmly, stepping forward. Rather than reporting her survival honestly to the crown, You attempted blackmail, threatening exposure, unless I relinquished my title in your favor." Gasps rippled through the hall at this direct accusation, nobles turning to stare openly at Edmund, whose expression tightened with visible panic as attention shifted uncomfortably toward his own questionable conduct. "Is this true?" King Baldric demanded sharply, clearly recognizing an opportunity to redirect uncomfortable scrutiny away from his own complicated position regarding Varenthia's history. Edmund hesitated, clearly calculating desperately for some path toward damage control, though the weight of evidence and witnesses gathered against him left little room for denial. "I merely sought what I believed rightfully belonged to my branch of the family," he said weakly. "Through blackmail and threats against an innocent woman and her unborn child," Alaric countered coldly. "Conduct entirely unbecoming of noble honor, regardless of whatever grievance you believed justified such action." The king, recognizing the shifting tide of the hearing firmly against continued denial of Elira's legitimate claim, finally addressed the assembled court directly. "The evidence presented today carries considerable weight," he acknowledged carefully, though clear reluctance colored his tone. "This court formally recognizes Elwyn Varenthian's legitimate claim to Varenthia's royal bloodline." Relief flooded through Elira so powerfully that she momentarily swayed, Alaric steadying her gently with quiet reassurance. Applause and murmurs of approval rippled through much of the gathered nobility, though tension remained regarding exactly what practical implications this recognition would carry moving forward. However, the king continued, "Practical matters regarding territorial boundaries and current governance require careful negotiation rather than immediate upheaval. I propose a formal alliance, recognizing Varenthia's restoration as a sovereign house, allied closely with the crown, with Princess Elwyn and Duke Thornwood jointly overseeing its reconstruction and governance." Lord Callum nodded approvingly at this proposal, recognizing the wisdom of gradual restoration rather than immediate, potentially destabilizing upheaval. "Selvaroon finds this arrangement entirely acceptable," he confirmed formally, "provided proper support and resources are allocated toward Varenthia's genuine restoration, rather than merely symbolic recognition." As formal negotiations continued regarding specific details, Edmund faced separate judgment for his attempted blackmail, stripped of significant privileges, and required to formally relinquish claims toward Thornwood's title entirely, his ambitions finally and completely dismantled through his own desperate scheming. In the weeks following the historic hearing, Thornwood Castle transformed steadily from a place of cold obligation into genuine home, servants and nobles alike now openly acknowledging Elira's rightful place, not merely as duchess, but as princess, destined to restore a kingdom long believed entirely lost. Construction began slowly upon Varenthia's old capital, resources allocated carefully through the newly formalized alliance between Thornwood and the crown. On a quiet evening several months later, Elira sat comfortably within the castle's private garden, her newborn daughter resting peacefully within her arms. Alaric joined her quietly, settling beside her with quiet contentment, reflected clearly across features that had once carried only cold obligation, now transformed entirely through genuine love, found unexpectedly, within circumstances neither had chosen freely. "She carries both our bloodlines," Elira said softly, gazing down at their daughter with quiet wonder. "Varenthia's fallen crown and Thornwood's noble line, united at last. A fitting symbol," Alaric agreed gently, "for everything we have overcome together." Elira looked up at him, memories of that first cold meeting at the castle gate, feeling impossibly distant now, compared to the warmth and genuine partnership they had built together since. "When I signed those marriage papers," she said quietly, "I believed myself simply trading my freedom for my grandmother's safety. I never imagined finding genuine love within such cold beginnings. Nor did I imagine caring for anyone beyond the practical necessity of securing an heir," Alaric admitted softly. "Yet here we are, bound not merely by contract, but by choice, by respect, by love neither of us anticipated finding." As the sun set gently over Thornwood's peaceful gardens, casting warm golden light across the small family, gathered quietly together, the weight of 20 years of hidden fear and danger finally settled into peaceful resolution. Elwyn Varenthian, once a frightened girl fleeing shadows across countless forgotten towns, now stood as living proof that even the coldest beginnings could transform into genuine warmth, that even kingdoms long believed entirely lost could find restoration through courage, loyalty, and the unexpected strength of love found where neither party ever thought to look for it. The cruel duke who had once married her purely for necessity now knelt willingly, completely, for love alone, and the crown once shattered by betrayal and fear finally found its way toward healing, carried forward, not through vengeance, but through the quiet, unwavering devotion between two people who had chosen, ultimately, to build something far greater than either had ever expected from where their story first began.